And here we go.
Awesome. Welcome all. I'm Mike Wilson, co-founder of the Lion Strategy Group, and I'd like to thank you all for joining us tonight in the third part of our series, Clearing the Pathway for Healing and Policing in America. Tonight's session is going to be over clearing the pathway for service. So before we get started, I would like to ask Pastor Williams if he would open up our session with prayer. So Pastor Williams, the floor is yours.
Father in heaven, we are grateful to you for this opportunity to call upon your name, but not only to call upon your name, but to listen for your voice through your word, to guide us, dear Father, as we try to work together as a human race to better this planet, to better ourselves, to better our government, to better our cities and our states, our country, and this world. Father, help us as we, as feeble human beings, look to you for our answers and for direction. And Lord, we pray for each panelist tonight that you would help each of us to listen attentively and to speak with thoughtfulness and never to seek to do harm, but always seek to do good. Forgive us of our shortcomings. Help us, Lord, always to look to you, the source of our strength, the author and the giver of life. In the name of Jesus, we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Pastor Williams. You know, our conversations over the last month have really been amazing. It's been amazing just the vulnerability that everyone has showed in sharing their personal experiences, sharing their just thoughts on the matter, knowing that no one person is going to be 100% right in what they think or what they view, but also knowing, as important, is we have to understand and get to a point in America where we're in right relationship. Many of you who watched our first episode probably saw Evan Barbie talk about being in right relationship as a country. And right relationship doesn't mean that we all have to think the same way or that we always have to agree on the same points. Being in right relationship is that, number one, we acknowledge and we value the person next to us, and we respect their thoughts, and we seek to understand their worldview. We're all the sum of our life experiences that form our beliefs and our opinions. But what this is about is, how do we create an America, a state, an individual community that's built around authentic truths, passion to understand one another, and to work together collectively to make it better today than it was yesterday. So we have an amazing panel tonight, a tremendous group of leaders and servant leaders. They're all distinguished in their own right, coming from a myriad of backgrounds. So I'd like to go ahead and introduce them to you, starting with Pastor George Williams with the Church of Christ at Eastside in Austin, Texas. Pastor Williams holds a BS and MS in Biblical and Related Studies, and he's the author of Lord, I Need an Attitude Adjustment. Dr. Hank Seitz, Dr. Hank, he's a behavioral psychologist and mental scientist and a good friend. Chief Matt Tristan, he's a retired Coppell Police Department police chief, and he's a cultural strategist. Rex Phelps, he's a city manager for the city of Haltom City, but also a retired chief of police and creator of One Habit of Highly Effective People, based on E to the fourth power, the key to an optimal employee culture. Dr. Robin Sherrill, author of Discussion Matters to Law Enforcement. Her professional background is in human resources leadership across a number of major companies in the Midwest. Her 2015 doctoral dissertation was focused on leadership in law enforcement, and her study was supported by approximately 150 officers across 6 different agencies in the state of Ohio. She's passionate about bridging the gap between policing and communities that they serve, and is been blessed to have a unique perspective involving the issues and challenges of both. Dr. Cheryl currently is a coach, mentor, and provides consulting services as the business owner of Discussion Matters, LLC. And Chief Jessica, I'm going to try to get it, Rebolado, of the Pflugerville Police Department, and I know I messed it up, and I apologize in advance. She is also retired from the Austin Police Department, serving 33 years in law enforcement. She is a graduate of the FBI National Academy, and she completed her undergraduate studies at Angelo State University. So we're going to dive into the questions fairly quick because we just have a lot of stuff to discuss, and we have a lot of wisdom on with us tonight. So we want to get to it. But just to set the context, we wake up every morning, and for most of us, every day is a great day, right? And as we go through the course of our day, something happens. Maybe it happens in our community. Maybe it happens in New York City or LA. But by the evening time, we're seeing protests popping up all across the country. And some of those protests are starting to turn a little more active. Maybe they become riots, and we start to see looting and violence come from it. On top of all of that, we have media covering these events, pushing out just more and more dialogue and perspective. News is spreading quickly. And then we add this thing called social media. And we see that it's starting to feed some emotions, and it's leading to more and more gatherings to express opinions, or in some cases, to provoke disorder. Leaders in these situations have very little time to act when it's happening. Their early decisions, though, prior to these type of situations can influence the course of events for months and years to come. What we're going to be talking about today is, and from the context of these questions and your experience, is how can we pre-pave our desired outcomes when this happens? It's not a matter of if, it's when. We can all sit back and say that would never happen in our community. That just wouldn't happen, but we're seeing it happen. We're seeing it happen in large cities and small towns. So with that in mind, when community leaders and police leaders are faced with any type of civil unrest, they often find themselves playing critical roles in trying to restore the peace and public safety, protecting the community, all while trying to respond to the media, right? And because they want their sound bites for their coverage. So the first question is, and whoever wants to jump in, is what are some things we can do up front to mitigate these events? Benjamin Franklin, one of our founding fathers, had a famous quote, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So what can we do on the front end to prevent these events or to mitigate them significantly from occurring? So I'll open it up to you.
I'll start, if that's okay.
Sure.
Being in the driver's seat, your team is going to look to you, especially if they don't have the experience. And, you have to quickly lead and set a framework to work with people from different groups. You have to have that discussion, that critical conversation about the challenges. It's time to listen. It's time to process different perspectives, to be able to identify the issue at hand, whether it's, did someone lose their life? So let's say that they did. You have to humanize your chief badge first. And you need to reach out to that family. And whether you were right or wrong, it doesn't matter. You are a human being first. And you give them your condolences, and then you reach out to the different groups. Because what you want is, you want their buy-in. You want them to know that you're trying to work towards something that is going to bring peace and not create violence. So developing those relationships with adversarial groups, but you shouldn't wait till this happens to create those relationships. And I think that's what happens sometimes. Maybe in smaller areas, people know each other more, and it's easier to engage with one another. But in a larger city, it might be a little bit more difficult. But that's what our task at hand is put yourself out there, show people your heart, show people where you're coming from, and that you want to work together with them to be able to come to a common ground.
I think Chief Robledo is absolutely correct, Mike, and everyone listening. You know, when I first heard the question, in my mind, my first reaction is, if that's when the head of the organization is looking at facing these issues, it's way too late. They're already way behind the 8 ball. It's about that trust bank that we've all heard about and we've all talked about. How many deposits have we been making into that trust bank, into our community throughout the years? Because there will come a time when we're all going to have to make withdrawals rather. But we can't make withdrawals if there aren't any deposits in there. Last session, the conversation was brought up by the panelists about the legacy of trauma by the minority community. If leaders weren't already aware of that, if they weren't paying attention to that, then they weren't doing their job at all. They were not paying attention at all. That is a reality in this world, and that has led to these violent and these constant protests that have not died out, that are still going on. So I think that we have to constantly be seeing, how do we keep making these deposits into our trust bank? Are we on the red already, which I think we were as a nation of policing? You know, we look at the 10 characteristics of servant leadership. The very first one is listening. Are we even listening to our community? Are we even listening to the type of policing they want? You know, I see these police officers and social media and these conservative talk shows just incredibly offended by the term defund the police. Well, guess what? We exist because the public exists. That's it. If the public's not there, we don't need to be there. And if the public decides to defund the police, they have every right to do that through their council representative, their commission representative, whatever form of government, because that's how we get our funding, through a tax base. And if they decide we're not worthy of that, guess what? That's the way it is. We cannot get offended by that. We have to pay attention to that. We have to listen to what the needs of our communities are, and what do they want from us and expect from us. And then we have to deliver. We can't just talk the talk and just not follow up with it. We literally have to walk the walk. So, you know, when we talk about all those characteristics of servant leadership, whether it's empathy, healing, but stewardship is when the well-being of our people, we're in charge of that. And what have we as a nation of policing done to take care of that? What have we done? That's the challenge. And that's where we all have to look introspectively as leaders in this profession and in communities and in faith and everything in government, to say, how do we regroup and start over? And that's going to be the challenge for us that we're all facing today.
Yeah, that's real good, Mac. And, you know, Chief Robledo, you talked about relationships. And in Discussions Matter, that's a big topic, because whether it is an organization, a corporate office, or law enforcement, leadership is all about relationships and influencing relationships and citizens. And if those relationships are tainted, then the inability to really influence citizens joining with the police to make a difference is seriously complicated. So I love what you said about relationships. Listen, maybe in the past, authority was the influence for citizens to partner with the police, but it's no longer authority, it's relationships. And if those relationships are being taken care of, then the lens of procedural fairness and police legitimacy will be a lot better within the community, and police and the community will be able to partner together towards these solutions and have these solution-oriented discussions. I also like that you talked about the fact that these discussions matter, because that's the whole premise behind Discussions Matter. Sitting down, having these conversations, understanding what happened, because the intent to protect and serve can never be compromised. Maybe the intent is to protect and serve, but something very bad happens. As long as that intent is still intact, the community can sympathize with what happened. But if your intent becomes tainted by your anger, by your ego, by the fact that you ran from me, by the fact that you made me look bad on video, then that intent becomes tainted, and now you are not serving with the intent to protect. So I love what you said about relationships, because that's a foundation for Discussions Matter.
Thank you,
Yeah, if I
Ron.
may, I'm sorry. If I may interject, I agree with everything that has been said. And whenever I'm listening, I'm always listening from a spiritual perspective. And I'm thinking about all of the biblical principles that apply, because there are so many of them. And when you talked about getting to know the people, prevention is what you're talking about. And it's too late once the building is burning down, where you can try to put the fire out, but you want to prevent the fire from happening. And so that is going to only be accomplished through building relationships that are positive with people. When I think about the Apostle Paul, he said, I became all things to all men that I might by all means gain some. All he's simply saying is, I established a relationship with people. I didn't put myself above them. I met them where they were. And since I met them where they were, I was able to communicate with them on their level and not as an outsider looking in. And so many times people just need to know that you feel my pain. I understand what you're going through. I get it. And when people believe you care, then they will respond in a positive manner. I also think about one of the greatest books in the Bible on building and leadership is the book of Nehemiah. The people had gone years, decades without building the wall that had been torn down. And Nehemiah got word of it. And of course he didn't come condemning the people and talking about how trifling they were for not building the wall. But he surveyed the wall, he saw what was wrong, and he came back and he tried to get the people to buy in. And the people, he said, do you see what I see? The walls are burned down. It's a reproach to us. And the people saw it. And the people said, let us rise up and build. Nehemiah helped them to see the problem. And the people together said, we need to come up with the solution. And the solution is, we together will build. And what they had not done in decades, they did in 52 days. That's because Nehemiah went to the people and said, let us do this together. And when we work together, and you don't put yourself above the people, but make them feel like they are part of the solution, people will generally work with you to accomplish that.
Thank you, Pastor Williams. And Rex, I'm going to direct a question to you, because I think this notion, partnerships, You know, and if we're talking about step-by-step approaches, where if we walked in and met with a chief of police or a leader in another type of organization, this has been kind of a resonating theme from our first discussion, whether we're talking about right relationship or we're talking about the condition of our heart. But I know a lot of your area of leadership and what you've tried to instill in a lot of your organizations, Rex, has been built around focusing and building those partnership relationships, not just with the internal stakeholders, but all stakeholders to an organization. So if you can just talk a little bit about that.
Sure. And first of all, let me just say, I mean, I would never try to speak for every police department. I can only get the frame of reference from the ones that I worked with, and I feel completely blessed because the vast majority of everybody I worked with always tried to do a good job. They were dependable, hardworking people, heroic people. And so I feel blessed. I had great mentors as well. And so I was taught early on by one of my mentors who sent me to the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People when I just became a sergeant long ago. And I just didn't realize the impact that had on me at the time, but it was probably more important to me and my development than all the tactical and technical training I had, although that was still important to have. And so I learned early on that we'll never be what we could be as an organization externally until we're all that we should be as an organization internally. So I started concentrating on that, and I started spending my time with my troops, not only for the community, but for them themselves, because there's no more appropriate place to attain personal growth than in public service. And so if you attain a high level of personal growth over a period of time, you are going to professionally develop. It just will happen. And so my goal was to have a high level of relationships and communication internally with personal growth. And what that is a mirror reflection out into the community. And so when you have emotionally well-balanced officers, they're happier officers. And when they're happier and more emotionally well-balanced, they serve the citizens better. So it's a win-win for everybody. So I think that personal growth training is important. But the other thing that we did was, and I'll just give you what ours was. It doesn't have to be these, but our particular value system was based on empathy, edification, enthusiasm, and excellence. I won't go too long here, but I have to get this out. So just bear with me. Empathy is obviously to see things from the views of others. That's not sympathy. Edification is to do and say things to build your team and fellow man up, as opposed to do and say things to tear them down. Enthusiasm is to be enthusiastic about life and what we do, and to be adaptable and to be creative. And then excellence is to do the best that you can, because we don't expect much out of ourselves. We won't inspire anything in anybody else. So when you take those 4 things and you just simply train everybody, and there's long training modules for each one of those, but when you put that together, it's called E to the 4th power, right? And so that can measure every question. I mean, you can measure every question that the officer has. It can measure their thoughts, their actions, the words they speak, even their body language, because E4 was the boss. Our value system was the boss. I'll tell you what else we did. We took that value system off of the wall to where just a nice frame and people looking at a concept and all that, and we think that we're about that. But if you don't measure yourselves, you may not be about that. So we took those value systems, those 4 values, and we made them the performance evaluation. And what we did was we measured and explained why through those values that we're good communicators, good decision makers, and those type of things. So we put the horse before the cart. And so the reason that we did this is because it wasn't a philosophy that was designed to protect us from others. It was a philosophy that was designed to protect us from ourselves. And so what happened over time, and we instituted this in 3 different departments since 2002, and it worked in rural areas, it worked in urban areas, and it worked in suburban areas. So I'm just saying, I believe that this is a time for police work to move to a value-driven organization as opposed to traditional policy-driven organization. And so I say all that saying that if we don't take care of our cops internally, then what we might do is create a culture where maybe something develops that shouldn't be there. Saying all that, I got to tell you, Mike, you know me. I'm a law and order guy. I love law enforcement, and without those cops, there can be no democracy. But I also don't defend bad behavior. But I do believe that value-driven organizations is where where police work needs to move towards.
Thank you, Rex. And that really echoes what we've been talking about, transitioning our focus to the human system. We've gotten very good at writing, because we're comfortable and we can measure it, writing new policies or creating new legislation, because we want something that's tangible. And when we're dealing with human beings, you're not always going to see that immediate response. It has to be that effort. So I'd like to start off with Dr. Hank for this next question. And Dr. Hank, what are some of the strategies you employ as a servant leader over the course of your career?
Yes, thank you, Mike. And servant leadership, sometimes the name is a little confusing, because it's like, gee, I'm supposed to be a servant per se. And so I like to look at it more on, it's the ability to, when you are in authority and power, to really be able to empower others. And it really starts with each one of us being connected to our higher power first, like before we start the day. And if we will do that, we'll have more answers and more solutions. We'll be more tolerant, if you will. I talk about pre-paving the day. So at first is this individual accountability for each one of us to really get connected and be in the stream of life, if you will. And when you're connected, then things will go better. And specifically, that we've talked in a couple of the other sessions about the importance to empower, for example, the supervisors and the supervisors of the police, that the supervisors are really in the know, and they can see when things are going good, when a person is, really doing, supporting the community, versus if a person is not, and they're getting disconnected, and they're in essence getting disconnected with their higher power, and thus they're starting to have feelings like fear. So the hate that we've seen is actually, it's not hate, there's two emotions, it's love and it's fear. And so it's that fear, and for us to have that understanding. So this idea to empower not only the supervisors, but I think there's really a need for now the community, for us to understand on what does the community want and how can we make this better. I heard an example where a police force was being paid $65 million, and the K schools were only at $1 million. And so again, I don't know exactly on how all that allocation goes, but for us to understand what is the community looking for, everybody, as we have this communication, I think everybody made great points in the first question. And I think it had to do, because I could only hear about half the conversations, my computer's a little garbled, but it's the importance of this communication. And so for me to be a servant leader is to really go out and to communicate, and having all areas, in fact, of the government, of the community, and then of each one of the entities of the government to be able to start communicating together. And I think that we can develop some communication strategies, and you could even use like a Facebook page to be able to have that contact information on who to be able to share your concerns with, that improving the mindset of the entire community and of the police, because really we're all in this together, and we all want to have the peace, the harmony, the justice, the equality for all. We all want that. Our souls want freedom. It's just a matter of understanding how can we all play together, if you will, and resolve this by being that servant leader and being open to others.
Thank you, Dr. Hank. Other panel members? What are some strategies that you employ? in your roles?
Just to build on Dr. Hank's comment, servant leader. So serving is about someone else. It's about who you're serving, whether that is law enforcement serving the community or the community serving law enforcement. It's an act that is from one and about another. So I think as leaders, when we don't make leadership about ourselves, but we make leadership about the people who are following, or the people who we are interacting with, or the people we are in essence serving, that's when servant leadership gets really good, because it can't be about you, it has to be about someone else.
Thank you, Robin.
That's great. Can I say something to that? I love that.
Absolutely.
I love that. I think that as leaders, we have to have a conversation with those that we work with and remind them that this badge doesn't make you any better than anybody else. It doesn't give you the authority or the right to take anyone's dignity away. You also have to remind folks that they are an extension of your leadership, of your excellence, and that you work for the community. On our walls in the admin room, we have lead with a servant heart. And I'm a visual learner myself. So when folks come in there, they need to know what our vision statement is. They see it. They see it plastered on the wall. So they know what is expected of them when they go and serve during each public contact, one at a time.
Can I chime in?
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I appreciate all of the comments and agree with those comments. But servant leader, of course, I don't think there's a greater one than Jesus. But when we look at the idea of servant leader, that means you're leading in service. You are serving, but you are an example of it. When I look at scripture, Jesus in John 13 took the towel and he washed the feet of his disciples. Here is the Lord washing feet. And he said in verse number 15 of John 13, I have done this for you as an example that you should wash others' feet. So what he did was led by example. And as someone has said, I'd rather see a sermon any day than to hear one. So when you lead, you show people how to do it. Paul told Timothy in 1 Timothy chapter 4 and verse 12 to be an example to the believers. And the word that he uses for example in the Greek language is tupos, meaning a mold that you can pour something in and it comes out the same every time. So you set the example of how it should be done, because it's not about telling people, it's about showing people. It's not about titles, it's about a towel. And when you are ready to lead like that, people will follow. You're not pointing the way, you're leading the way.
Thank you, Pastor. Mac?
Yeah, great comments by everyone. I can reflect on the two agencies that I worked for in my 38 years with Carrollton, and then starting all over with COPL. When I arrived at COPL, the entire focus of everything we did was to be servant leaders. I didn't use that terminology per se. As Dr. Hank said, sometimes it was misunderstood and seen as subservient leadership as opposed to servant leader. But everything that we did and everything that we employed was based on what Rex said. It started internally. It's how we treat our own people. And through the years, I've been blessed to work with Southwest Airlines in many capacities and known several of their leaders, including Colleen Barrett. And one of their sayings, which they have many, but one of their sayings is our employees come first and our customers come second. In today's business, everybody's the customer's always right and the customer comes first, but that's not how Southwest looks at it, because it's how they treat their employees and supporting and providing them resources and being servant leaders to serve their employees so that their employees can go and serve their customers. We did the same thing at COPL and the organizations that I work with, because that we had to be that role model that Pastor George was talking about. We have to start internally, as Rex talked about, and how we are going to do our job, because that's what we signed up to do. We got to the point to where we talked about constantly, we talked about the why constantly, about why do you exist? Why do you come to work? Why did you take an oath to do this job? But the other thing we talked about constantly was the impact that every one of us makes every single day. And what we said was, every day you come to work, think about this, every day you come to work, you have the opportunity to impact people's lives. How are you going to impact people's lives today? In a negative way or in a positive way? Are you going to serve them? Are you going to help them? Are you going to lift them up? Even if that means arresting a drunk driver to help him help himself. Whatever that is, how are you going to serve? How are you going to impact people's lives today? So yeah, it started all about modeling the behavior, and then constantly emphasizing those words, because words matter. And as Jessica said, those mission and vision statements that we had, they weren't just a plaque on the wall. There was something that we pointed out to every single time.
Right. That great comments. And that brings me back to a lot of what we discussed in the first two sessions have really been brought up is, Dr. Hanks starting with the two powerful forces. You have love and you have fear. But we're responding more and more from a fear basis. And we have to address that. Everything has to start inside whenever you're talking about a police department. Whether it's your police officers, your jailers, your dispatchers, it's a mirror effect. The dynamics going on internally are going to be reflected externally. So the great insight, Mac, Rex, Pastor Williams, Jessica, and Robin, because that's where it has to start. That's why laws and policies are not going to lead to the desired change over time that the communities are talking about, because effectively they're saying that what you're doing right now, we do not agree with those strategies or those philosophies. There's no harmony there. But we've also seen what happens in communities where there is harmony and the policing strategies and philosophies are congruent with your community's expectations. You see decreases in the crime rate. You see decreases in traffic collisions. So, more people are observing the laws, whether it's a speed limit sign or it's the penal laws or it's the code of ordinances, because they've recognized our police department, our police agency as being legitimate. And through that, their observance of the law has now become a priority because they're active partners with that police agency. So great stuff. Any other comments on that question? If not, we'll move on to question number 3. No zingers have come in yet, so that's a good one. So Jessica, I want to kind of have you start off with answering this question. Just hearing you speak at some different functions or talking with you at conferences and seeing what you do, but you do some pretty awesome things in building trust between community and your department. So the question is, what can we do to grow trust between the community and the police?
Well, first of all, I'm a little bit different. So I just humanize myself. I wasn't born in this polyester, and I tell people this all the time. Behind this badge is a person just like you. I may be a little brown on the outside, but I'm pink on the inside, and I bleed red just like you. And I tell people that all the time. I have feelings. I have a heart. I worry about the same things you do. So for me, it's over communicating. For me is relationship building. It's about bringing people up, because if I'm able to talk to someone and make them feel better about themselves than when I first met them, then I did something good, and that makes me feel good about why I'm doing what I'm doing. I believe, and I teach command staff, if you enter a room full of strangers, you leave after shaking everybody's hand and after welcoming them, after introducing yourself and saying, thanks for being here. Make them feel like they're the most important person in that room at that time, at that moment. It matters, because you don't know what someone's going through. And it's our job, if we can, and we have the capability, to make them feel important. And it's simple for me. I mean, it's just treat people the way you'd want to be treated.
Mm.
I'll jump in here. I agree with what Jessica said about over communicating the message and building those relationships. And I think that I'm very concerned with the direction law enforcement seems to have taken in the recent years, 5 to 8 years. And we told our officers constantly, our troops constantly, you know, in a traditional organization, basically when someone calls the police, it's not for a good thing. Something bad has happened. And the analogy is going to the doctor. When we go to the doctor, it's typically not for a good thing, unless maybe a physical, and some of us may dread that as well. But it's still something bad has happened. And whether you're a victim or whether you're a suspect, you call the police, and it's a bad interaction to start already. So how do we turn that paradigm around to take ourselves out of the enforcement role, when what about this whole session is about changing from a warrior mentality to a guardian mentality? We're not at war with our communities. We're not at war with our citizens. And all of that is about humbling ourselves and being vulnerable and telling the community. We were very open to the community. We can't do this job by ourselves. We need your help. We have a limited amount of officers. If everyone in our city picked up 911 and called the phone, what would happen? Well, number one, they jam up the phone lines, but we cannot respond to every call. The entire premise of law enforcement in our country is that the majority of the population, the majority of our citizens will do the right thing constantly. We're there to address those people that are not doing the right thing. We have to be vulnerable. Pastor George mentioned about, people know that you care. I remember when these protests not long ago in Fort Worth, and other officers have done this throughout the country, where there was a line of police officers, there was a line of protesters, and it's building, the tension is building, and a Fort Worth police officer kneels in front of the crowd. And what happened? Immediately diffused the entire situation. Immediately. Instead of, okay, we're here, we're going to bang it out, and this guy goes and kneels, and then other officers follow suit and kneel as well. In that instant, everything was diffused. And then I see stupid comments on social media, he shouldn't have done that, he should have maintained the line or whatever. Well, that took a lot of courage for that officer to do that. It took a great deal of vulnerability to say, I can't do this by myself. I am on your side. I'm here to do a job, but I need your help. That was a powerful moment. And I've seen other officers throughout the country do it. And I think it's that simple connection with people, as opposed to that I'm a cop and you're not mentality. And by gosh, you're going to do what I say because I wear a badge and I carry a gun. That's it. End of discussion. Well, I don't need those people. Jessica doesn't need those people. That's not who we hire. That's not who I want in my organization. And that has to change throughout this country.
Thank you, Mac.
I think it's
Any other comments?
Yeah, I just want to pick up on the words courage and vulnerability, because it's important to acknowledge the gap. I think building trust also means acknowledging the gap. So here's the gap. Here's what we're doing about the gap. Here's where we need you to help us close this gap. Engaging the community, sharing with the community. What is our mission, our vision? What is our vision for improving? Here's what's happening, and making that decision to change. I think there's some real courageous actions that need to happen in order to make sure that that trust is building. And that means acknowledging the gap, not defending or saying, listen, we did this because of, or that's not really what happened, because now we get into intent versus impact. There's an impact, and people are focused on what is that impact. And it's very real to them, whether it's a reality or perception. That perception is a reality to them. So I think building that trust also means acknowledging the gap and what the plans are to close the gap.
Robin, and I'm sorry, Mike, I gotta jump in here. That's absolutely genius, and that's what we have to do. What is the gaps? You know, where do we all want to be? We all want a quality of life city, agency, a place to live, right? So where are we? Well, some people think we're here, some people think we're here, some people think we're way off. Well, we have to start that conversation. When somebody from the current administration asked a high-ranking official from our current president's administration about is there a systemic racism problem in policing, and they immediately was like, no, of course not. Well, let's be honest, right? I mean, so, and what I've said 1,000 times, I may have said it the last time, police officers were not manufactured in a warehouse. We weren't programmed in an IT lab. We weren't grown in a field. We come from the general population. There are brothers, sisters, mothers, fathers, our neighbors. And there is a systemic racist problem in our country. It exists in our country. And we come from the general population. So if that's a problem in the general population, you have to acknowledge that that's going to be a problem, not just in policing, but in the courts and justice and government everywhere. So we have to, first of all, identify that, and then come to the table. And how do we minimize these gaps? How do we get there? We have to start with that conversation.
Right, and with that, I'll just inject with a comment that's going to end up being a question. So what we're seeing from my perspective is it's a leadership issue, right? Everything starts with the leader setting the tone, and those leaders wanting to stand in the gap for their people. We have the officers, and rightfully so, they need to be held accountable for their conduct and the actions that they take. But why are we not addressing the leadership in the organization? Were the resources there and provided? Were the investments made? And not just training the officer for the tactical response, because I think that's where we've seen a horrible shift in policing. We're promoting the adventure around the profession. Look at how uniforms have transitioned. How many agencies are wearing BDUs, which are the military style pants, or the load bearing vest, which is what you would see a person in the armed forces wear as they're going into a military zone. That plays into the mindset of the officers out there on the street. Let's go a step further. Why are we tinting our windows so dark? We're talking about the engagement piece, and we know that to impact the community, there has to be two things: engagement and education. Well, what citizen, if they have no knowledge or previous interaction with the police department, good or bad, is going to walk up to a person that looks like they're straight from a war zone in Afghanistan, driving a vehicle with dark tinted windows, and they never roll them down, even if they're driving through a park. So Mac, I think you hit the nail on the head in how the profession has shifted. We have to get back to the nobility of what it is to be a police officer, why we exist, and who grants us the powers to exist. And at the end of the day, who are the people in any community that are going to know most about what's going on in that community? So there were a couple questions if anybody wants to speak to it, or we can move on to a question that I have for Dr. Hank. Any additional comments? Okay. Dr. Hank, can you hear me to ask, or?
About half of it.
Okay.
So it's been very challenging.
Yes. How does an officer's mindset play into effectively building a relationship with a citizen to grow trust?
Yeah, yeah. And, you know, it really is mindset that all of science has agreed within the last 5 years, that anything that we want to create, any circumstance, any event, any person, even to change a person, that which we have the power to do, that it all starts with our thought. And so this is why the mindset is so critical. And for a police officer to change that mindset, and I love Max, the way he talks about this warrior to guardian. That's just a whole mindset change, because, you know, again, if you're trained on all these bad things are going to, you know, possibly happen to you, that what happens is you start getting disconnected from reality, if you will, and disconnected from, you know, I was talking about earlier, your higher power from God. You get disconnected, and that's why there's so many suicides in police. In the police force, you know, more than a regular other job, and more than are killed in the line of duty is the suicide. And it's because of that mindset. And what we've done is we've trained the police, for example, to look at, oh, you know, go in and conquer and take control. And, you know, there's nothing about this, let's go in and understand. And these are partners with us. And so this whole, by changing the mindset, and we can do that, and you mentioned through education, that, you know, through this education and through the expectations of the job. So this can be done, and it can be done fairly quickly by really starting to manage the expectations of the job. And then, as I was saying, specific with police, and the supervisor really is the eyes and the ears for the community, for all of us, to really understand where they are and to give that guidance and to be that servant leader and to really connect with their police officers and be able to start having that mindset about this idea of being a servant, of communicating together, of being this guardian. And I remember last time we heard on the 10-year-old black boy growing up, when he heard police or saw police were coming, he just ran. And I was thinking, oh my gosh, so did I. And I'm a white guy, right? You know, and so like it impacts all of us, that, you know, police just kind of, we were all brought up that, hey, this is not a good thing. It's not a good situation. And we really need to change, the community needs to change their attitude. But we can start with us, and by us being, you know, in government, in the police force, to be able to really start that leadership. And that's the true leadership, where we start really walking this talk, and we are there to be the servant and to be the guardian of the people, because we're back to, we all really want the same thing. And now it's up to us to stand tall and to show our leadership and change that mindset, improve that mindset on wanting to be able to serve and be that guardian.
Thank you. All right. Moving on to the next question, and whoever just wants to sound off first. How should the history of policing be looked at to drive the future of policing?
I think that policing has evolved as the catch-all. Because the way I look at it is, who do you call when your child doesn't want to go to school? You call the police. Who do you call when someone's in mental crisis? You call the police. Who do you call when someone's homeless? You don't like how they look, where they're sleeping. You call the police. And at the same time, who do you blame when it doesn't work? I know that police officers are trained in mental health cases, but we've only got 40, maybe 80 hours of training. I don't think that we're putting the emphasis where it needs to be so we can actually help society and help those that really need us. If there's other experts that we need to, I think somebody put a question on there about the mental health resources and combining those with law enforcement. I think that's a great model. And I think it's worked and it's working in other areas. And I applaud those agencies that are doing it. I wish we could do it here. We just don't have the bandwidth or the budget. And it all comes down to budget. But at the end of the day, you can't put a price tag on someone's well-being and what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to be peacekeepers. We're supposed to help our youth. And you guys mentioned running from the police. Yeah, in my culture, we did too. We were scared. We were taught to fear the police. But where is the education? I think it's a culture issue, and I speak from my culture. Because the way I was raised, we didn't have any police officers in our family. We never spoke anything good about police officers, so we didn't see them in a good light. So I think it's an issue that we all need to be talking about. But police has to do their own homework also, and the heavy lifting. We also have to put our money where our mouth is, and we have to be those mentors. We have to be that role model for the youth that are scared to approach us. How about we approach them? How about that vest that we're wearing, the Molly vest that looks a little bit intimidating to some, but they don't understand that the officers are wearing them because it helps their back issues. The majority of the cops have back issues because of all the tools in their tool belt. How about we talk to kids about that? How about we show and tell? How about we let them sit in our cars in the driver's seat, hit the lights, hit the sirens, and say, look, this isn't intimidating. I would prefer that you run towards us if you need help than run from us because you don't understand what we're about. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah, I was going to chime in on that. Yes, talk about healthy relationships, and you can't have a healthy relationship unless the person is healthy, mentally healthy. You mentioned, I think Dr. Hank mentioned about the high level of suicides. That is telling us that something is systemically wrong, and it is a stressful job. I don't want to put all of the onus on the policeman. I think the community has some responsibility as well. One of the things that I have put together and tried to share with the police and the mayor is a plan that I think that can help to reconnect the community. Part of that is to help the community to see the policemen as human beings, as mothers and fathers, sons, all of that, husbands, wives, because sometimes people lose sight of that reality, that these individuals that are in these uniforms are men and women just like we are, and they have emotions and feelings and needs just like we do. And they need love and affection and care just like we do. So I think that part of bringing about healing in a community with the police is to somehow or another bring them together into a non-threatening environment so that they can sit down and just talk about those things and just say, look, I want to go home at night just like you want to go home at night. And I think that we need to humanize the policemen so that people will see them not as the boogeyman, but as human beings who are trying to be there for our good. So I think there's some work that needs to be done on both sides of the line. And I know that can happen. It's just about putting together the venue that it can happen in. And that can happen where you can start letting people see these policemen are real. I'll give you a biblical principle again. The word was made flesh and dwelt among us, John 1:14. And Jesus became what we are so that we might understand who God is. And so it's not that he's some far off being, but he's right here with us. And he came to exegete him, John 1:18, to make him known to us. And so what happens is when we understand who God is, we desire a relationship with him because we don't see him as this person, this being that's trying to destroy us, but who loves us. And I think you have to humanize the policeman as well. So the community has work to do as well.
Thank you, Pastor Williams. You know, a lot of this reminds me of what we discussed a couple weeks ago, and this was two first steps identified by Dr. Alston and Dr. Brown. One is police officers have to become those ambassadors in the community, to become those guardians. And Dr. Brown mentioned, you know, let's take off the sunglasses, you know, because eliminate some of those barriers, whether they're psychological or physical barriers to that connection. And I believe a lot of that goes to the type of training that we're putting the officers through and the type of scenarios. And we know a big piece in our police academies is to give them the base level of knowledge so that they can enter their police department, go through field training, and then begin to serve. So, you know, this is something that, you know, we work very hard to ensure under our current standards that we're selecting the most healthy, the best candidate. But maybe we need to look at that a little bit different. You know, is the best candidate the candidate that looks the best on paper? Are we focusing on identifying, because every city and organization is unique. We're all comprised of different types of people, different demographics. One may be more of a bedroom community versus an urban environment. Are we truly identifying what the talents, motivations, and behaviors are for that unique position? And we can only glean that. We can't glean that through a job description. We have to talk to the experts that are performing that role well in that organization, but we also have to talk to our community. You know, I think that's our first step from what I'm hearing from you all is if we were to take this step further, when we look at the history of policing, and there's been good and there's been bad, and we acknowledge that from a servant leader mindset. Why is this term of reconciliation so tough for a lot of people to swallow? Because in conversations, I've probably had 30 conversations around this topic, and it all comes down to, why should I have to apologize for actions in the past? But I think we're missing the boat on what reconciliation really is. Reconciliation isn't necessarily me apologizing for something that occurred 300 years ago. It's simply me acknowledging that it happened, and I understand your perspective. I can empathize with you. And then coming forward and saying, but here's what I'm doing to ensure that those things don't happen in my community moving forward. So I'd just like to know, what are your thoughts around this term reconciliation? Susan has shared it a couple of times in conversations, and that was a first step that she shared with us two weeks ago. So, but I'd like to know your thoughts on that.
I think that it gets back to the conversation that Robin started a little bit earlier about acknowledging the fact that there are gaps, acknowledging that my reality might be different than your reality. And just because we may disagree doesn't make me right and you wrong, and doesn't make you right and me wrong. There has to be reconciliation. right, in every aspect of community life, from government to public service to every aspect in our school district, everything that we do, there has to be reconciliation in order to heal. There has to be healing within within our entire country. And we have to understand the other person and the other person's reality. Otherwise, it'll never change. You know, what have we learned from history? Well, I don't think we've learned a lot. Look at the only thing a lot of police officers in some of the classes that I teach, when we talk about Ferguson, Missouri, the only thing they focus on was the shooting of Michael Brown by Darren, whatever his name was, the police officer. And the discussion is on whether it was a righteous shooting or not. They don't focus on the entire Department of Justice study that showed everything that Ferguson, Missouri was doing, the city, the government, the city manager's office, the financial directors, I mean, everything they were doing to build their budgets on the backs of their citizens by arresting, citing, stopping a car and writing 14 tickets. They don't even know about that. So what have we learned? Have we learned anything from history? And as was said earlier, I think that we're regressing in how we dress and how we look, how we act, as opposed to coming together with the community. So the reconciliation is extremely important. It's the first step of healing in order to move forward with a better, more caring society that we all want to live in.
Thank you, Mac.
Yeah, and reconciliation is something that's demonstrated. It's behaviors and actions. It's not saying, you know, we're okay now. It's the consistent demonstration of behaviors that say, I care about you. I know what to do. I want to be a partner. I want us to be allies. I'm a part of this community. I care about it. We are partners in this. It's what you do, right? It's what we do. It's our actions. It's not our words. So behaviors, accountability for behaviors. History is certainly important for us to look back on and say, what happened? Where is the procedural unfairness? Why did it happen? Where is the data? Where are all these videos coming from all of a sudden? Who's watching and who's holding others accountable for performance and behaviors? So history is really important for us to build from, but there has to be some accountability with it as well.
Amen.
Thank you.
I was going to say something about accountability also. That was great stuff. But I was also going to mention transparency. And it starts at the top. If we make a mistake, own it, apologize. You know, one of the things that I try to tell command staff is if somebody emails you and they put their cell phone number or a contact number on there, don't email them back. Pick up the phone, make that connection. Listen to their voice, listen to their heart, listen to their concern. Let them hear your compassion, empathy back. Make that connection. That's how you build that emotional capital. And this is going back to the basics, you know, paramilitary training. It doesn't matter. We got to get back to the basics right now, folks, if we're going to make a difference. I think that's where we start.
Thank you. Pastor Williams, Rex, y'all both unmuted at the same time.
Well, I just want to say I appreciate what the pastor said, and I don't know what it is that we on the public service side can do, but if you want to talk about videos, look at all the officers that are getting feloniously killed. That has an effect on the psyche of the officer, and then we talked about protecting or helping the officer stay emotionally healthy. So I really appreciate what the pastor said, because that's an untold or untalked about part of this, and we don't share those videos. I mean, maybe we should, but we don't. I'm just saying I appreciate what the pastor said. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to say I appreciate that because I think there has to be fairness whenever you're going to talk about healing. And there has to be acceptance of responsibility on both sides of the equation. And when you talk about reconciliation, reconciliation cannot happen until there is an acknowledgement that wrong has been done. And that's on both sides of the equation again. There's a real simple book. I said, I wish I had thought to write it, but nevertheless, it's called The Language of Apology. It's so simple. It's like, wow, you know, but it's complicated for people to do. If you're not read it, I think it's an excellent book. Just the 5 languages of apology. Just simply, I am sorry. Sometimes people can't say those words. I am sorry. Number 2, I was wrong. Number 3, please forgive me. Number 4, is there anything I can do to make it right? And then number 5, I promise to try not to do that again. I mean, those little 5 simple principles can go a long ways in reconciliation and healing wounds that have been inflicted, because sometimes people cannot even acknowledge that I've done anything wrong. And that's where it starts. And again, that's the only way reconciliation can ever happen. That's to start with acknowledgement of wrong on both sides.
Thank you, Pastor. Because we are in this together, you know, and this wasn't created in a vacuum. And for us to truly have a solution that's long lasting, that meets the needs of all, then we all have to come together in creating that solution. But that's not going to be something that's going to be done overnight. You know, I referenced a speech by Dr. King at the last session, and it's The Other America, where he talks about what that, you know, just how big that task is. It has to be far and wide. It has to be a major project that's throughout America, and it has to involve all people in America, because today it's this issue, but we can talk about many groups in America that feel non-represented in some form or fashion. There was a question from one of the viewers: what are we doing in law enforcement to address gender bias along with racial bias? Because, you know, as I remember going to every national accreditation conference whenever I was up for reaccreditation in my police department, and every time the question was posed, Chief, what are you doing to try to increase your female officer count and to diversify your police force? And that's a real challenge, because we were always actively working our recruiting efforts, you know, not just in our region, but statewide. And we began national recruiting efforts to address that. But I think everything that we've talked about, the engagement of the community, recognize it, the humanizing of the officer, like what what Pastor Williams referenced. You know, Rex, when he talks about building those partnerships, and Robin and Mac and Jessica talking about taking that extra step to make people feel valued and like they belong. You know, even if it's walking into a lobby or to file a police report. Dr. Hank, I know you're probably hearing every other word. Has that improved any for you? Okay. I don't think so. So I'm going to pose the last question. In your perspective, from a servant leader perspective, what are some steps that you believe we could take as a profession to clear the pathway for the future of policing? And just feel free to unmute and answer.
Well, you actually touched on it earlier, Mike, is number one, I think we have to hire the right people for the job. Who are we recruiting? How are we recruiting? What do our recruiting messages show? Are they a bunch of SWAT guys, you know, busting through a van and kicking in doors, or canine officers, or are they officers at a national night out event kneeling with kids and just, you know, Jessica was saying, showing them our cars, our equipment, being out in community service. You know, in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, we have North Texas Giving Day. Are they a part of that? Because your agencies are a part of that. But I heard a long time ago from Southwest Airlines that said they'll train people to do whatever the task is. It's really hard to train professionalism or empathy or love and care and respect, or treating people with integrity, with dignity and respect. That's really hard to do. So if you want professional police officers that are caring, kind, empathetic people who see themselves as servants to others, and everything they do is in the service of others, then hire kind, caring, loving people that are empathetic, willing to do whatever it is they have to do to serve others. You can't retrain that, and get rid of those employees that can't buy into that philosophy. Coach them, train them, get them to where they want to be. But ultimately the choice is, this is who we are. This is who we're going to be, rather. If this isn't if you can't do this, and if this is not who you want to be, you might want to go somewhere else where you'll be happier, because you don't have a place in this organization. You know, I was talking to somebody earlier, the comment that is made sometimes when this whole thing in Minnesota blew up, I saw comments on social media that said, what every good cop hates is a bad cop. Well, I teach all over the country. And in every organization that I come into, there's some officers will say, well, I know that guy doesn't do his job right. I know that guy doesn't do his job right. Or when something bad happens, officers will say, we knew it was a matter of time before that was going to happen. But why the heck didn't you do something then? If you hate bad cops so much, why didn't you stand up then? It's too late now. We all have to pay for it now. So the first step, and there's plenty of steps from identifying the gaps and coming together with our communities, but the first step is hiring the right people and getting rid of those people that don't belong and shouldn't be wearing our uniform.
Thank you,
Amen.
Mac.
Amen. You know, I want to feed off of that. That's excellent. I think when I first came to Pflugerville 3 years ago, they didn't have social media, believe it or not. And so when I got here, I started showing pictures of what these guys and gals were doing. And they're like, why are you always taking pictures? And I said, because it's for you. I'm highlighting you. So they had a problem me highlighting them, because they hadn't been highlighted before. And these are things like, I just had an officer go to Walgreens and buy a walker for a citizen because he kept taking the same call over and over and over. And he said, well, I'm just going to buy it from my own pocketbook. You know, I put that on LinkedIn, and folks they wanted to reimburse him. I said, no need. We've already taken care of that. Those are the people that we want. But as leaders, we have to have the courage to stand up to the police unions and to the grievances, to get rid of the bad cops. You have to, if you're going to be wearing this bling on your collar, you got to have the courage to make the tough decisions. You can't sit back and not do the right thing. You have to be able to get in front of your community and say, you know what, I had to get rid of that bad apple, but the rest of them, they're good people. There's a time when to stand up. There's a time when to support. And there's a time to do the right thing. Mac, you're absolutely right. I'm right there with you.
Thank you, Jessica.
Okay, I'm trying to let others talk. All right. I think that some of the things I might say may sound different from what you may have expected, but nevertheless, it is what I believe has to be done. When you're talking about hiring the right people, you have to also make the job lucrative enough that the people want to do it. You know, I think that you need to pay the policemen well enough that they don't have to kill themselves working overtime, so that they are so exhausted that they can't, you know, they're always in an irritable mood. And if I can't pay my bills, I just think that we need to rethink it all and look at how we can better equip the policemen, not with just equipment, but even looking at the totality of the whole person's life. We all want to live a decent life. And we want to address the whole man, holistically speaking. And that's what I'm looking at, not just putting Band-Aids on bullet holes. What's the deeper issues that need to be addressed that can help solve the problems that perhaps create an environment where men become bitter and angry? And I'll just make an analogy here. You know, I feel for the policemen who are hated simply because they have a uniform on and you hate them. Well, you know, that I try to make that analogy and said that's the same thing that we felt a lot of times as African-American men and women, but we can't take our skin off at the end of the day. So I can identify with that pain. And so I have empathy for the policemen who are trying to do it right because they're suffering unjustly. And that bothers me as well. So I'm just saying there's a lot, and I don't think we can solve it here, but in just these few moments, but I wish that we would sit down and just talk about these things, put the plans on the table and say, how can we address these issues with the police department to help these men and women be better, live a more qualitative life so that they don't have to be bitter and angry and hurt and feel like they need to take their lives. And that will impact how they police other people. Thank you.
Thanks, Pastor. Rex?
Yeah, I just wanted to add some thoughts here. First of all, you really think about it, being a police officer, what we're asking is exactly, I mean, we need to hold that standard. But what Mike, you and I, we used to tell our officers that we want officers that know how to be compassionate, but we also want officers that know how to be stern when the time comes. But really, the best officers, the ones we want, are the ones that, when necessary, know how to do that at the same time. And so that's a little deeper than what people are thinking sometimes. And I know all the chiefs on the panel feel this way. You know, we've got to be quick at dealing with a problem if we have it, but we have just got to be just as quick at backing an officer when they do right. This is a difficult job. And I'm going to tell you something right now, and I know the police officers on the panel know this. This is no joke. That we need officers that know how to deal with dangerous people sometimes. There are dangerous people out there, and there's unpredictability to police work. So when we look for these folks, you are right. We've got to find the right ones that know how to do it and know how to do it right. But I just wanted to throw that thought out there that what we're asking is a lot from a human being, and the pastor's completely right. We need to pay for that somehow as we move forward, because that is a step above what a normal person is able to do.
Thank you, Rex. And Dr. Hank?
Yeah, so again, I can't hear very well about every other word, but what I've been getting, it's been just fabulous. So I apologize if I'm repeating on something that was said, but the question on the servant leadership and how we can clear that pathway for the future of policing. And I think what's key is to have everybody involved in the decision-making process. And so that is getting together with the community, with the government, with the police, and really understanding on what our needs are and then what the solutions are. And so I've seen this before in organizations where part of the organization will just decide, oh, this will be best for everybody, and they go do it. And then nobody knows what they had done, and even though it was good intentions and maybe the best solution, not everybody was involved. So just this need of communication, and I know we had talked earlier about just communication and the importance of that, and that's that servant leader is who are you serving? You're serving others, and for us to really communicate that, again, I think it's about the needs and what the solutions are. And the other thing is, I love this idea about education and then accountability. And so it's this accountability that we can, say nice things, and we just don't want things to be back to the way they were. So we need clear definitions, clear roles. And then I heard something about hiring, and for sure we need to improve our hiring accuracy, but understand what is that accurate as far as who are we looking for. And this role is going to be changing now. The role of the police are going to be changing. And for us to, again, come together, all of us communicate, understand how we want this to look, and then to start hiring for that. And we have hiring tools that can literally match everything that we want, but we have to be clear on what we want.
Thank you, Dr. Hank. I just want to thank you all for giving of your time tonight. It takes courage to come on a panel like this and engage in a tough conversation. And as I stated before, we're not wanting people who see the world exactly the same. The solution is going to come from our country's greatest strength, and that's our diversity. You look at every major event in the history of our country, it has been through the diversity of thought, the diversity of perspective that has compelled us to do amazing things. Just look back to the space race and all the technological improvements or medical advancements, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And this is no different. The solution lies within us. There is absolutely no doubt. So thank you. And just know that if there's anything that Mike and I can do to assist you within your organization, or we're here to serve. Lion Strategy is here to serve. A lot of the tools that Dr. Hank talked about as far as the recruiting and the selection piece, Lion Strategy is bringing those tools to the public sector, and they're tools that have never been available in the past. But they're ways to take the bias and the claims of disparate impact and discrimination away from those processes. And it's a process where you can align and identify, and we'll help you do it through our benchmarking on what are the talents, motivations unique to every position in your organization, and then we'll help you find that best candidate. So if there's any way that we can serve you all, call us. You have our contact information, and for the viewers, I'll push it out I'll push out an email in the chat, and feel free to reach out to us if you'd like to learn more. But until next time, stay safe. Thank you for your service, and thank you for spending your evening with us. Thank you.
Amen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mike, you guys stay on. Dr. Hank and Mike, stay on, please.
Hey, Mike, it kicked Dr. Hank out.
Oh, it did?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it went well. I think it
Hey, Mike, hold on for 1 second.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's kind of transitioning the host role, so I'm trying to end the recording.
Okay. was going on with Dr. Hanks?
I don't know. It was a bad connection, I suspect.
I know my lighting in this room is horrible.
You can also, Mike, if you have the host, you can also end it for certain people too. Oh, no, you said Dr. Hank was her host?
Yeah,
Yes,
he-
ma'am.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's what the,
I hope he comes back.
I told him to try to come back in.
Okay.
Bye, Kevin.
You know him?
Kevin, Larry, and Dwayne, those are all mine.
So,
I actually had 13.
Oh, is that right?
Huh?
Wow.
Yeah.
Kevin, it has you identified as the host. Are you able to go down and stop? There should be a record button.
Oh, Kevin sure is. How did you get to be host?
Yeah, I'm not sure.
What you all might want to do is, Kevin, can you take yourself off mute? Wonder how you got to be host.
I don't know.
What you might need to do is, how would you stop the recording? Let me try to text him.
Yeah, I just texted and I think he's trying to come back in.
He's texting Kevin, right?
Yeah, text Kevin. So you might want to end once you get the videos, the recording situation, you might want to end this and then start a new chat just for you and Dr. The doc.
Hey.
So he's texting. Kevin texting me. I wonder how that happened. No, I stepped away. He said he stepped away. Need you.
Was he one of the first to sign on, maybe?
Maybe.
And because of that, it just flipped to him.
He said he's gonna log off.